All right, let's dive into this. Existentialism. It's a philosophy that tackles those big questions, the ones we all ponder, like why are we even here and what's the point of it all?
Yeah.
And get this, it's way more relevant to your everyday life than you might think. We've got all your sources lined up here, and we're going to explore how this philosophy, which grappled with a rapidly changing world back then in like the 19th and 20th centuries, can, still speaks to us now.
It really is fascinating, isn't it? How existentialism kind of popped up during a time of such massive change. The Industrial Revolution, cities exploding in size, people's entire way of life being turned upside down.
Right.
It was like they were dealing with a brand new world, almost like what we are facing today with all this crazy tech and everything changing so rapidly.
It's true. Like, just think about how much even our world has transformed in the last, 10 years. Like, it's insane. So much uncertainty, choices galore, and it can feel, I don't know about you, but it can feel kind of overwhelming at times. But that's where this whole existentialism thing comes in. It's not about giving you like a rule book or a set of answers, but it's more like a new perspective, maybe like a framework for navigating this wild world we're living in.
Yeah, and one of the, I guess, core ideas of existentialism is this idea that existence precedes essence. It's a little bit of a head scratcher, I'll admit, at first.
Right.
But it basically means we aren't born with like a predetermined purpose. We're born, we exist, and then we make our own essence, our own meaning through all the choices that we make along the way.
So no pre-written script, we're just kind of writing our own story as we go.
Exactly.
That's both exhilarating and terrifying at the same time, honestly. But before we go any deeper into that, I think it would be helpful to introduce, some of the major thinkers, the people who shaped this whole philosophy. They're like the all-star team, right, of existentialism.
Yeah.
So first up, we've got Søren Kierkegaard. Now, what stands out to you about him?
Well, Kierkegaard, he was really captivated by the concept of, he called it angst. We call it anxiety. He believed that this feeling of unease, uncertainty, it's an essential part of what it means to be human. It's that feeling you get when you're faced with a big decision, realizing how much freedom and responsibility you actually have.
So instead of running from that anxiety, he's saying, we should embrace it. That doesn't sound super fun, but I can see how it might push us to actually examine our lives and make choices that are really, truly aligned with who we are and what we believe.
Exactly.
Speaking of kind of uncomfortable feelings, let's talk about Friedrich Nietzsche. He's the one who famously declared, and this was a bit controversial back in the day, God is dead.
Yeah.
I mean, that definitely ruffled some feathers.
Right. And it's super important to remember that Nietzsche wasn't being literal here. He wasn't saying God had physically, passed away. He was pointing to a real shift happening in society, this decline in traditional religious beliefs and this rise of a more secular worldview. It's like he was saying, hey, the old structures, the old ways we made meaning are falling apart. We need to find new ways to make sense to the world,
Okay, I gotcha. So that's where his idea of the Übermensch comes in, right? This whole idea of the individual creating their own values, not relying on any outside source for authority or meaning.
Exactly.
Sounds like a superhero almost, a self-creation superhero.
Exactly. The Übermensch is someone who, fully embraces that freedom and responsibility to define their own meaning, their own values, without needing all those traditional structures. It's like they forge their own path, define their own destiny.
Okay, I'm kind of digging this Übermensch idea. So we've got anxiety with Kierkegaard, self-creation with Nietzsche. Now let's bring in Jean-Paul Sartre. He's the one who famously said that we're condemned to be free.
Right.
What did he even mean by that?
Well, Sartre was a huge advocate for radical freedom. He believed that we're fundamentally free beings, even though, honestly, that freedom can feel like a real burden at times. And the idea of being, condemned to be free is that we don't get to choose not to choose, right?
Yeah.
We're constantly faced with making choices and even choosing not to choose something. Well, that is a choice in itself.
So no escaping responsibility. No matter what, we are the ones, at the wheel. That's a lot of pressure, but I guess it also puts us in the driver's seat. We become the authors of our own lives.
Precisely. And this is where Sartre's idea of bad faith comes into play. The idea that we try to avoid the responsibility that comes with our freedom.
Right.
Like we pretend we have no choice, we blame outside forces for our situation, or just blindly follow what society expects of us.
Do you have, a real-world example of that? Like, how does this bad faith actually play out in someone's life?
Sure, imagine someone who's stuck in a job they absolutely hate, right?
Yeah.
but they keep telling themselves, well, I can't quit. I need the money, or I'm too old to start over. What they're doing is they're denying their own agency, their own ability to choose a different path for themselves. That's living in bad faith.
That's a really powerful way to think about it. It's so easy to get trapped in those mental loops, those ways of thinking that keep us from really taking, ownership of our lives and our choices.
Right.
And existentialism is like a wake-up call.
Yeah.
Like, hey, you've got more power than you realize. You can choose differently.
Absolutely. It's about realizing that we have that freedom and then using it to craft a life that feels more real, more authentic to us.
Okay, so that brings us to Simone de Beauvoir. She brought this crucial feminist perspective to the whole existentialism movement. She was, challenging all those traditional roles and expectations that society tends to put upon women.
Exactly.
Tell me more about that. How does she challenge those norms?
Well, de Beauvoir argued that women were often defined by their relationships with men, their roles as wives or mothers, not as individuals in their own right.
Right.
And in her book, it's a classic, The Second Sex, she explored how all those societal limitations, they actually restrict women's freedom. They restrict their ability to live authentically.
So she's saying women are just as free as men to define themselves, to create their own meaning, to go after their own dreams and goals.
Absolutely. And she was, a huge advocate for women's rights, for equality, for the idea that women should have all the same opportunities, freedoms to shape their own lives as men do.
All right, so we've got Kierkegaard and his idea of anxiety, Nietzsche with the self-creation thing, Sartre talking about radical freedom, and de Beauvoir, bringing in this feminist lens. It's a pretty impressive lineup.
It is.
I'm starting to see how these ideas could really, shake things up, make us question everything. But how does all this actually translate to everyday life? Like, what does it actually mean to live as an existentialist?
That's a great question, and it's exactly what we're going to be exploring further in this deep dive.
Yeah.
How can we take these big, sometimes really abstract philosophical concepts and apply them to the real world, the actual challenges and choices you face each day?
Okay, so we've set the stage. We've met the all-stars, the big thinkers. Now it's time to see how all this plays out in real life.
Right, in your life.
Welcome back to our deep dive into existentialism. Part 1, we got to know some of the big names, like Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Sartre, de Beauvoir. But now, let's get practical, right? How can we actually use their ideas? Because existentialism, it's not just about, understanding philosophy. It's about using it like a tool.
Yeah, like a toolkit.
Right, a toolkit to help you live a better, a more meaningful life.
For sure.
And one of the most powerful tools is this idea of radical responsibility. Remember Sartre?
Yeah.
When he said, we're condemned to be free. That freedom is, well, it's exciting and kind of scary, right?
It is. That's part of it.
It comes with a certain weight.
Oh, definitely. Radical responsibility means owning that we are the authors of our own lives.
Okay.
Even when things feel totally chaotic and out of control.
Right.
It's that recognition that we always have a choice.
So no more blame game.
Right.
No more saying, well, it's not my fault because what? It's about owning our choices.
Even the tough ones.
Even the tough ones, yeah, okay.
It's about shifting that mindset from I have to I choose to.
Yeah.
And when you make that shift, you discover something really powerful.
Okay, what's that?
You discover a sense of agency.
Right.
Like you have power. You can make changes.
That makes sense. Can you give me a concrete example?
Sure. So let's say someone's stuck in a job that's going nowhere.
Right.
They're miserable. They might say, I'm trapped. I have to stay here, bills, family, the economy. But when you view it through the lens of radical responsibility, they might say, okay, I choose to stay in this job because it's stable right now, but I'm also exploring other options, things that are better for me long term. So it's like a subtle shift, but it makes all the difference.
It can, yeah.
Like you're taking back control of the story of your life.
And it's not about ignoring the real stuff. The financial pressures, the family obligations, all the societal expectations that are out there.
Right.
It's about acknowledging those, those real constraints and then asking yourself, okay, even with all of that, what choices do I still have?
Right.
How can I move towards a life that feels more authentic?
More true to myself.
Exactly, yeah.
Doesn't this whole radical responsibility thing, though, doesn't it sometimes make you feel guilty? Or like you're blaming yourself for things?
Sure, that can happen. It's important to balance it with self-compassion. Radical responsibility is about taking ownership, but not about beating yourself up for stuff that's, truly outside of your control.
Okay, so it's about finding that sweet spot.
Between taking action and accepting what is. Acceptance. That's another biggie in existentialism, right?
Yeah.
We talked about how it asks us to confront some pretty heady stuff. That life, at its core, might be meaningless. And that, we're all going to die.
Yeah.
How can we, accept stuff like that?
Well, it starts with, with actually acknowledging it. A lot of times we try to avoid thinking about the heavy stuff.
Oh, yeah.
We push those thoughts down, pretend they're not there.
For sure.
But existentialism encourages us to, look right at it, to just sit with that discomfort, to feel the fear, the uncertainty.
Yeah.
Really let ourselves experience all those feelings that these truths evoke in us.
That sounds pretty intense, but I guess like ripping off a Band-Aid, right? The anticipation is always way worse than the actual,
Exactly. And on the other side of that initial discomfort, often what you find is this amazing sense of liberation. Because when you accept that you can't control everything, when you finally let go of this illusion that everything is certain and permanent, well, then you can really focus on what you can control.
Right.
Your choices, your actions, your attitude, how you show up each day.
I think that's really resonating with me. I've always been such a control freak, but I'm realizing that all that clinging, it actually limits me.
Right.
It's like trying to hold on to sand. The tighter you squeeze, the more slips through your fingers.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And that's where the true freedom lies,
Okay.
in letting go, surrendering to the flow of life, embracing the fact that things are uncertain. And it's not about giving up. It's about putting your energy into what really matters.
Which brings us back to, I guess, the search for meaning.
Right.
Right? If there's no inherent meaning in the universe, how do we even find it? Does existentialism give us any guidance on that?
It does, and it's actually really empowering.
Oh.
Existentialism tells us that meaning isn't something you just stumble upon out there in the world. It's something you create through your actions, the things you do, the people you connect with. It's about contributing to something bigger than yourself.
So it's not like finding the meaning of life. It's about finding what gives your life meaning.
Exactly. And that meaning, you can find it all over the place. In your passions, your creative outlets, in your relationships with people you love, your commitment to a cause you believe in, connecting with nature.
Okay. Yeah.
Even in just, living each day mindfully, appreciating what you have.
So it takes the pressure off, right?
It does.
It's not about finding the right answer. It's about exploring what feels right to you. But even this, like creating your own meaning, it can feel kind of overwhelming.
I get it.
Like, where do you even start with that?
You start small. Ask yourself some questions. What brings me joy? What makes me come alive?
Right.
What are the things I do, the people I spend time with, the experiences that make me feel like my life has value?
It can be simple stuff, right?
Oh, absolutely. Like going for a walk, a good conversation with a friend, or working on a creative project.
Right. And when you start to pay attention to those moments, those little sparks of meaning and purpose, you can make more conscious choices. You can choose to do more of the things that feed your soul, the things that make you feel like you're living a life that is really yours.
Okay, and that sounds a lot like authenticity, right?
It is.
Another key concept we've been talking about, we touched on it a bit in part one, but let's go deeper. What does it really mean to live authentically?
Well, authenticity is about being true to yourself, your own values, your beliefs, what you want in life.
Okay.
It's about listening to that inner voice, that inner compass, instead of just blindly following what everyone else is doing or what society tells you to do.
Sounds easy, but it's not, is it?
Yeah.
I mean, in a world that's constantly bombarding you with messages about who to be, what to look like, what to achieve, it's tough to tune all that out and just, really connect with your true self.
It's a journey, not a quick fix.
And it takes a lot of self-awareness, a willingness to be brave and, challenge the way things are. You got to ask yourself those hard questions, like, what do I really believe in?
Right.
What are my values? What kind of life do I want, even if it's different from what everyone expects?
Yeah, and sometimes those answers might lead you down a different path.
Yeah.
A path that's less, less traveled, one that doesn't quite fit the mold.
Right. Authenticity isn't about fitting in or being part of the crowd. It's about embracing who you are, all the quirks, the imperfections, all of it. And having the courage to show that real self to the world.
That's awesome. It's about celebrating what makes you you. And isn't that also, a form of freedom?
Absolutely.
The freedom to just be yourself fully, unapologetic.
Authenticity and freedom are totally intertwined.
Okay.
When you don't need to conform to please everybody else, to fit into a box someone else made, well, that's when you unlock a deeper level of freedom.
Hmm.
the freedom to create a life that actually reflects who you are.
This has been so insightful. Existentialism is really giving us a new way of seeing the world ourselves. But there's still a part of me that feels, I don't know, intimidated by all this.
I hear you.
All this talk of freedom, responsibility, authenticity. It's a lot to live up to, right?
It is a challenge, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
But remember, existentialism isn't about trying to reach some impossible ideal.
Okay.
It's about embracing the messiness of being human. It's real life.
So it's not about being perfect all the time. It's about just showing up authentically, even with all the, imperfections, all the struggles.
Exactly. And it's about realizing that we're all in this together, trying to figure it all out.
Right.
Trying to find our way to make sense of this crazy, sometimes absurd existence,
Sure.
to connect with each other and find meaning in a world that can feel pretty meaningless at times.
And that, I guess, that leads us back to one of the core ideas we talked about.
Mm.
Community, relationships. Even though existentialism is about individual responsibility, it's not about isolating yourself.
No, not at all.
It's really the opposite, right?
It is. Genuine connections with other people, they're crucial
Okay.
for our well-being,
Yeah.
for our ability to actually thrive as human beings. It's through those real connections that we can share our experiences, support each other, and find meaning that goes beyond ourselves.
And just like everything else in existentialism, those relationships don't have to be perfect either.
Right, right.
It's about embracing those imperfections, trying to build connection, trying to be authentic with each other.
Absolutely. And this actually brings us to another really important part of existentialism, acceptance.
Okay, acceptance. Tell me more about that. How does acceptance fit into all of this?
Well, existentialism asks us to face some pretty tough realities.
Right.
That life can be absurd, that death is inevitable, that we can't control everything that happens to us.
Yeah, that's all true.
And when you're confronted with those truths, acceptance is, well, it's essential.
So it's about acknowledging those things we can't control, accepting the limitations of being human, finding a way to be okay with it all.
Exactly. And acceptance doesn't mean giving up.
Right.
It's not about resigning yourself to a life of misery. It's simply about letting go of the struggle, the fight against what we know is going to happen anyway.
Okay.
The things we can't change. It's about making peace with the present moment,
Mm-hmm.
even with all its imperfections.
And doesn't that actually free us up to focus on what we can control?
It does.
Our choices, our actions, our attitudes, how we respond to everything around us.
Right, exactly. When you let go of the need to control everything, you open yourself up to experiencing life more fully. You're more present, more genuine. You shift your focus from fighting reality to, embracing it, to finding the beauty and the meaning, even in the hard times.
This idea of acceptance is really hitting home for me. It feels like a key, to feeling more at peace, more free.
It is. And, it also ties back into the idea of finding meaning. When we accept the realities of life, the good and the bad, we can start to see how precious each moment is. Just the fact that we're alive. And that in itself can be a really powerful source of meaning.
Wow. It's all really coming together now. We've
Yeah.
talked about responsibility, meaning, authenticity, acceptance. It's like we're building a whole new way of looking at life, of approaching all the challenges that come with it.
That's exactly what existentialism is all about. It gives you a new toolkit, a way to live a life that's more intentional, more authentic, and ultimately more fulfilling. And it's not about following a bunch of rules.
Right.
It's more like principles, practices that can help you navigate this, this crazy modern world with more awareness, more courage, more purpose.
All right, deep divers, that's it for part 2 of our journey into existentialism.
We did it.
We dove deep into how to actually use this philosophy, exploring how you can create a life that's more aligned with what you believe in, what you want. Ready for the final part. Right, welcome back to our deep dive. We're in the final stretch now of our existentialism exploration. It's been a journey, huh?
It has.
We've tackled some pretty heavy concepts, met some incredible thinkers.
Yes.
Hopefully you're starting to see how existentialism, well, it can actually help you live a better life, a more meaningful life.
Yeah.
What strikes me is how it really pushes you to grapple with those big questions.
The big ones.
Right. The ones we often try to avoid, like what's freedom all about? What's the meaning of this whole thing? Our place in the universe, all that.
Those are the important ones, though, aren't they?
They are. But before we wrap up, I think we should clear up some stuff about existentialism.
Okay.
Because it gets this rap for being, gloomy or depressing. But is that really fair?
I don't think so.
Hmm.
That's really just scratching the surface.
Okay.
I mean, sure, existentialism acknowledges the hard stuff, the suffering, the uncertainty, the fact that we don't have all the answers, but it's not about wallowing in despair.
It's about recognizing those things and then saying, okay, so now what? How do I want to live? What kind of life can I create?
Exactly. It's about choosing to find meaning and joy, even when things seem absurd. It's about owning that freedom to shape your own life.
Okay, so myth busted. Existentialism is not about doom and gloom.
Cool.
It's about taking responsibility.
And making choices, conscious choices.
Right. Speaking of myths, there's another one I hear all the time. That existentialism is this lonely philosophy all about isolating yourself from everyone else.
Ah, yeah.
What do you think about that one?
Another misconception. While existentialism emphasizes individual responsibility, it's not saying go be a hermit.
Right.
Authentic connections with others are essential. We need those.
We do, because we don't just create meaning for ourselves.
Correct.
It's about creating meaning with other people.
It's shared.
Yeah, those real connections, those shared moments, they make life so much richer, so much deeper.
They do, they do.
All right, one last myth to bust. Existentialism is against happiness. I always picture, those folks in black turtlenecks brooding in cafes.
I know, right? But seriously, existentialism doesn't say you can't be happy. It just, well, it has a different definition of happiness.
Okay, I'm listening.
It's not about chasing pleasure or, doing what everyone else says will make you happy.
It's deeper than that.
Yeah, it's about finding fulfillment that comes from being true to yourself, pursuing what truly matters to you, connecting with something bigger than yourself.
It's those moments of genuine joy and connection that come when you're living in line with your values.
Yeah.
Even if that means, doing things a little differently, maybe even challenging the way things are.
Absolutely.
So there we have it. Existentialism demystified, myths busted. Hopefully it feels a little less intimidating now.
Yeah, I hope so.
It's not about being depressed, isolated, or, against happiness.
Yeah. No, it's quite the opposite.
Right. It's about freedom, responsibility, meaning, and being real, being authentic. Before we wrap up completely, let's talk about the legacy of existentialism, because it's had this huge impact, right? I mean, on art, literature, psychology.
Even pop culture. It's everywhere.
It is. It is.
You can see existentialist themes in, just tons of books, movies, music.
Right.
Like, think of The Stranger by Camus or Nausea by Sartre. Those books explore these themes of, feeling alienated, freedom, this whole search for meaning. And they're still relevant today.
And in psychology, existentialism has been so important, especially for the development of existential therapy.
Oh, yeah. Existential therapy is all about helping people explore their own existence, facing those anxieties, and creating a life with more meaning. It empowers people to take responsibility for their choices and live more authentically.
So existentialism has given us this whole new way of understanding ourselves, right?
For sure.
Our relationships, the choices that we make, and it's still influencing how we think about the world.
It's a philosophy that really inspires us to live more consciously, more authentically, to recognize that we have the power to choose, even when those choices are tough.
Well, listeners, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into existentialism. It's been quite the exploration. I hope you found it as, thought-provoking as I have. It's been a wild ride.
It has been.
We've really dug into the main ideas, busted some myths, and looked at how you can actually apply all of this to your own life.
Yeah.
And now it's your turn.
Your turn to take the wheel.
Exactly. You get to write your own story. You get to decide what matters to you. So knowing that you are the author of your own meaning, what will your story be?
What choices will you make? What values will guide you? What kind of mark do you want to leave on the world?
This deep dive, it was just the beginning. The real adventure, that starts now. As you take these ideas and, you weave them into your own amazing, one-of-a-kind life. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, and we'll catch you next time.